Welcome, everybody, to the Man of Vault podcast. This is episode 1. We're going to tap for 3, put our magic opinions on the table, and you can decide if it's worth it to take 1 on your upkeep. I'm your host. My name is JC, and as always, I have my co-host, Arven, with me. Arven, tell the people how you're doing.
Oh, I'm doing fantastic. Like you said, I am the other host of the podcast, and this podcast is brought to you by our patrons. If you are looking to support the show, you can always find us at patreon.com/themanofvaultyt. And just so everybody knows, this coming November, some of the Man of Vault crew will be at GP Las Vegas, or in this case, it's just called MTG Las Vegas. It'll be myself, Ian, our thumbnail designer, and also Austin, our host of the Modern Meta Matchups. And with that being said, take it away.
All right. So we're going to start with our opening segment, which we are calling What Card Do? So today we're going to talk about a card that has seen some play in Modern past. Hasn't been around for a few years now, but we want to talk about how it's one of those things people constantly ask for it to come off the ban list, and is it finally time, and honestly, is this card even good enough anymore? That card is Splinter Twin. Hey, Arven, what's a Splinter Twin?
So a Splinter Twin is an enchantment for 2 and a red. It says enchant creature. Enchanted creature has tap. Create a token copy of enchanted creature. At the beginning of the next end step, exile it. So that's the Oracle text. What it usually says is put it on a Pestermite.
Put it on a Pestermite, put it on a Deceiver Exarch. Notably, the tokens have haste,
Yes.
so what you're trying to do is put it on a creature that, when it enters play, untaps something, so that the tokens will untap the original, make more tokens with haste, swing for infinite damage.
Yep. And in present years, or my apologies, in previous years, this was used to be a house. Like, it was very difficult to deal with.
A big part of the combo was that Pestermite and Deceiver Exarch have flash, so you could play them at your opponent's end step, untap, play your 4th land, play Splinter Twin, win the game.
But in recent years, Modern has gotten to be so quick that, honestly, we don't think it should be on the ban list. We have cards like Ragavan, we have cards like Darcy that just do better things. And if you don't know Darcy and Ragavan, play more Modern.
No, honestly, those are the staples of blue-red decks nowadays, and even there are decks that will occasionally splash Kiki-Jiki and play this combo using that. Kiki-Jiki makes copies of non-legendary creatures, and the combo works the same, but at the same time, that's 5 mana for a legendary creature, so it's a lot more interactable, and it's just way too slow for blue-red decks nowadays. And honestly, we've gotten so much interaction at cheap prices, cheap mana prices in the last few years. When this combo last existed in Modern, we didn't have Fatal Push.
Nope.
We did not have Unholy Heat.
Nope.
We did not have Force of Negation, which definitely stops the combo.
Oh, absolutely. So Force of Negation, if you don't know, it's 2 blue, it's 1 blue, and it's exile a blue card from your hand. If it's not your turn, you may cast the spell without paying its mana cost. Counter target non-creature spell. So you can leave that up, and if they do end up going Pestermite on the end step, untap, play this card, you can just cast Force of Negation, and they're forced to do nothing. They can't force you back because it's their turn.
At that point, to be safe, most of those blue-red decks would have to wait till turn 5 or turn 6 to leave up a counterspell like a Spell Pierce or a counterspell, literal or actual counterspell, to be able to stop this combo, and that's just way too slow in the current meta.
Absolutely. So that's the one thing, is they gave us Jace, they gave us Counterspell, like Jace the Mind Sculptor. If they can give us those cards that are fairly, like, slow-ish, that are also used to be insane in Modern, and for the longest time, well, not legal, I'm thinking it's okay to put Splinter Twin, because you did mention Kiki-Jiki's in the format, and from present, even the past, like, couple of years, I haven't seen a real Kiki-Jiki deck in I don't know how long.
Yeah, and there have been times where the Kiki deck has been real, but it's never been oppressive, not since the days where Splinter Twin got banned. And even then, the reason Splinter Twin got banned was not because it was oppressive necessarily, but because it was so common among blue-red decks that Wizards wanted to get some more diversity in the format.
And I think they did in the past couple of years. Modern's very diversified.
Giving us 2 Modern Horizon sets has really given us a lot of opportunity to make a ton of new archetypes, and a lot of those archetypes are just very easy to play, which is something we're going to talk about.
Absolutely.
So let's get into our main topic. We're going to start by talking about why do we love Modern so much. We film a lot of Modern on this channel. If you haven't seen our videos, we recommend going to our YouTube channel and checking out some of our Modern meta matchups videos.
Yeah.
But yeah, we enjoy Modern a lot, and we just want to talk about why do we like Modern and then what's in Modern.
Yeah. So, honestly, why I love Modern so much is I like the competitive aspect of it. I like sitting down, you have one opponent, they have 20 life, either make them run out of cards or have their life total at 0. Or if you're playing Infect, 10 Infect.
Yeah.
But, I really enjoy just sitting down. I like very competitive formats. I like playing at the highest tier of Magic you possibly can without, spending a couple $1,000s on a Tabernacle.
Yeah, exactly.
But I really enjoy that aspect because, like, I play a lot of Commander, and in Commander there's something called politics. In Modern, that's just called collusion. That's how you get a game loss or disqualified.
Yeah.
But that's really my big thing about Modern. It's just very competitive. What about you? Why do you like it so much?
My favorite thing about Modern is that every time I sit down to play Modern, I feel like I'm playing powerful cards. Powerful individual cards, but also powerful synergies between the cards. And like you said, I don't have to spend multiple thousands of dollars to do so. You can play good Modern decks for a couple $100, maybe even less. And one of the things we're going to talk about is that Modern is very diverse right now. There's a bunch of different decks you can play, a bunch of different archetypes. And I always find that when there's no dominant archetype, when there's no single deck that's running the whole show, even if there are some cards that see play across a lot of decks and you kind of pay attention to, that makes it a pretty healthy format, and a healthy format is a lot more fun to play.
Oh, absolutely. That's the one thing that's why I kind of want Splinter Twin back, because it's a very healthy format. It won't warp the format in any shape, way, or form, and we have a lot of different, like, tier 1 decks, or even close to that. There's just too many of them. Sure, they might share, like, 2-3 cards, but outside of that, it's a very healthy format right now.
And bringing back Splinter Twin or similar cards would, again, introduce a whole nother archetype that we've discussed. It's something you can interact with, but it also would force other decks to kind of play around. Oh, right, this card's in the format. This archetype's in the format. Okay, I got to change my sideboard. I got to change my strategy. I got to, maybe I include more removal in the main. Maybe I play bent toward fighting aggro more often or combo more often.
Oh, absolutely. So that's why I kind of like the competitive aspect of it. So you always have to be thinking. You have to change your sideboard, maybe the main board, put in 1 or 2 cards you normally wouldn't play, and it just kind of helps it evolve and change into something that's just better than what it was.
Yeah. When you're up against cards that you don't want to see or that are giving your opponent consistent wins, the solution is to adapt your strategy and to grow as a player and, change up what you're bringing in your sideboard next time. Prepare for what's in your local meta or what you expect at the competitive meta. If you're going to something like MTG Las Vegas, come prepared for what are people probably going to play, but you can't afford to just sit on your archetype and keep the same 75 and say, no, I'm playing this no matter what. Modern is healthy because it's changing, and you have to change with it.
Absolutely. So Modern is not a rotating format. So nothing will come out of it unless things get banned, obviously, and stuff like that. But still, you do have to evolve your deck no matter what deck you're playing.
Definitely true. So, with that being said, let's talk about some of the archetypes in Modern and some of the decks that fit in those archetypes. We're going to talk about 5 main archetypes today. There are several more, and honestly, a lot of the decks we talk about and a lot of the decks that exist in Modern can kind of fit into multiple of these categories in certain cases. Some of the aggro decks we mentioned might feel like a combo deck at certain points, but so the 5 categories we're going to talk about are aggro, control, combo, mid-range, and hybrid combo, which is where you play a combo, but you also have another game plan similar to one of the other archetypes that allows you to buy enough time to get your combo online.
Yeah, absolutely. So the deck that I'm talking about for aggro is going to be Hammer Time, kind of to play off the whole combo aggro style. Hammer Time is just looking to put a few cards into play, one of them being Sigarda's Aid, where you can just kind of put some equipment or some auras. One of note, where you play some little dorky thing, usually maybe unblockable, indestructible, or flying, some sort of evasion of some sort, and you just want to put a hammer on it. Sure, it will lose flying, except you're now attacking for 10 on like turn 2 or turn 3.
Yeah.
That's a lot of damage out of nowhere from a little dorky deck.
It really is. What's great about Sigarda's Aid 2 is that not only does it let you automatically attach equipment that come into play to a creature you control, but it also lets you cast them at instant speed, as though they had flash. And being able to go turn 1 creature, turn 2 Sigarda's Aid, Colossus Hammer, for example. I'm suddenly attacking with like an 11/11.
Yep.
And some of the creatures in this deck too are just solid value creatures. Esper Sentinel having a hammer on it means that your opponent has to pay 11 extra for their first non-creature each turn, or you get to draw a card.
Oh, absolutely. Also, the other thing is, you got to play 8 copies of Colossus Hammer. So legally, you can only play 4. But you also play a card called Stoneforge Mystic, which it goes and grabs your hammer. And if just in case something happens to that hammer, you also play Luris as a companion. So you can just bring it right back and just keep the chain rolling. Putting a hammer on a Luris seems terrifying.
13 lifelink. I think I'm in for that plan.
Yeah. What about you? What do you got for us for aggro?
So we're going to discuss probably the most famous aggro deck in Modern's history. I'm talking about Burn. Burn is a classic. This is also a Luris deck in its current iteration, but Burn has 2 primary components. First is creatures. We're trying to play mostly hasty threats or cards that damage your opponents for playing the game of Magic. So we're talking about Goblin Guide, which is a 1-mana 2/2 with haste that lets your opponent draw the top card if it's a land. We're talking about Monastery Swift Spear, a 1/2 with prowess and haste for a single red mana.
In prowess in this deck, you can randomly attack for like 5 damage with that thing on like turn 2 or 3.
Without even trying, yeah. And then Eidolon of the Great Revel, probably one of my least favorite creatures in Magic. 2 mana for a 2/2, and whenever a player casts a spell with mana value 3 or less, the Eidolon deals 2 damage to them.
Modern? Ooh.
Modern is a 3 or less format right now for the most part, and so Eidolon is punishing.
Oh, absolutely.
Also, being a Luris deck, you can play the Eidolon back out when it dies.
So, like, with kind of like what you mentioned, even some of the big combo decks, like Tron or some of like the big mana decks, also play a bunch of little things just to keep their pieces in play or keep assembling their pieces. Eidolon will do a lot of work.
Or just a lot of cheap removal in the case of the control decks, playing Unholy Heat or Prismatic Ending. That's going to ping you. The second half of this deck is Lava Spikes. As many cards as you can play that say, for as little mana as possible, deal damage to my opponent. Burn's whole goal, as is normally the goal in aggro, how fast can we count down from 20?
Yep. And that helps you with cards like, well, Lava Spike, Lightning Bolt, Lightning Helix,
Skullcrack.
Skullcrack is a big one.
Yeah, stopping your opponent from gaining life is huge.
That's amazing what that card can do. Also, the other card you get is Boros Charm.
Yeah, I was going to bring that one up.
I like making my opponents try to gain life, or if they're trying to wipe your board, if they're on like Damnation style decks or anything like that, you can just give everything indestructible and come in for even more.
If you've already spent a bunch of your Lava Spikes on the same turn, maybe you give your Monastery Swift Spear double strike and just hit for way more damage than you probably should. Yeah, this deck is great. I personally don't like going up against it because they count so quickly.
I don't either. You would think 20 is a lot, and like 3 damage for a spell is, whatever. No. You get to 0 very quickly, like turn 3, turn 4.
And it turns out there's a lot of Lava Spikes legal in Modern, and Burn's going to play a lot of them.
Absolutely.
All right, let's move on to Control. So we've got there's a few good Control decks in Modern, but there's 2 that stand out in particular right now. Arven, why don't you lead us off?
So one of them, it may not seem like a control deck, but it does play just like one. Is it Tempo, where you get to play Ragavan, you get to play Darcy or a Dragon's Rage Channeler, whatever you want to call it, and you also get a card called Murktide Regent. Oh boy, that is a card. So Murktide Regent, if you don't know, it's 7 mana for Delve. Well, it's normal, it's never 7 mana. So it's 5 colorless, 2 blue for a 3/3 with flying. You're like, oh, why would you play that? It's pretty bad. Except whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, put a +1/+1 counter on it. And when it enters, for each card that was Delve that was instant or sorcery, put a +1/+1 counter on it. So this little, maybe you're paying 2 mana for this thing, you could randomly make it an 8/8 and with flying. And you also get cards to back it up. You just get a bunch of control cards. You get Lightning Bolt, you get Spell Pierce, you get a couple of other like dig through like effects just to keep the chain rolling. And Monkey takes all of your cards, especially if you're going against like burn style of decks. They're hitting cards that you want to see, except they're gonna play it instead. So you're gonna be in a lot of trouble.
Yeah. So starting out early with cards like Dragon's Rage Channeler and Ragavan, and then churning through your deck with Expressive Iteration, Thought Scour, Mishra's Bauble, which is a great card.
Yep. And so there are some versions of this deck that don't play the Regent and also can play. It depends on what variation you want to play, but you also can play Lurrus. And Lurrus with Mishra's Bauble says draw 2 cards every turn. Really, really powerful magic. It doesn't seem like it because everything is usually 3 mana or less, but it adds up very quickly.
Yeah. But the versions that do play Murktide Regent, like being able to go blue, exile 5 instants or sorceries. I have a 8/8 now, yeah. And then whenever an instant or sorcery leaves your graveyard, it gets another counter. Flashback spells or just delving away for a different regent.
Yep. It's a lot. It's
if your opponent attacks your graveyard in some way.
Oh, that's a lot, especially with all the cards that are running around. Oh man. So that's the one I'm thinking. If you're against like Living End or anything like that, it is a little awkward that it goes away. But there's too many different things that can just stop what your opponent is doing. It just gets big, out of control very quickly.
Yeah, and another reason I like the Regent version of this deck is because Regent doesn't get hit by a lot of the spells that people play now that say of a certain mana value, you know, Prismatic Ending, which we'll talk about with some later decks, only hitting
Heat.
X or less, yeah, and Unholy Heat
sometimes dodges it.
Yep.
It doesn't see as much play, but Fatal Push does not hit it.
Abrupt Decay
doesn't hit it. Lightning Bolt, a lot of times it's 3 damage to a 9/9 or a 5/5, and it's just okay, cool.
if my opponent has to spend an Unholy Heat with Delirium and a Lightning Bolt to kill this thing, good.
Oh, absolutely.
2 for 1.
I like 2 for 1s, especially in this style of deck when you can punish them for doing that.
Yeah,
Oof.
huge.
But on the other side of the spectrum, what do you got for control?
So probably my favorite control deck, Blue-White X control. So we call this Blue-White X because there's a couple variants. You could play straight Azorius, which is my favorite way to do it. Jeskai is a thing where you splash a little bit of red. You could get some lightning helixes in there and some bolts to maybe finish out with some damage if you can't quite finish it with the very few creatures this deck plays. Esper has a great variant where you get to play Esper Charm as an additional 4 copies of honestly Archmage's Charm in a lot of ways, yeah.
Absolutely. So like also with the damage aspect, you also get cards like Shark Typhoon where you can just make something enormous when you're not drawing anything and just attack them for a lot.
Yep. So the basis of the Blue-White X control decks is just to play a bunch of counterspells, mostly Counterspell and Archmage's Charm, occasionally Dovin's Veto out of the side. Prismatic Ending and Path to Exile are your go-to removal spells. If you're splashing red or black, you might play Fatal Push or Unholy Heat. And then you get one of the greatest wraths in Modern, Supreme Verdict.
Oh, yeah. So,
cannot be countered.
No, especially if you're against that tempo deck and they have a bunch of creatures. Too bad.
And then you get to play some pretty powerful planeswalkers as well, like Teferi Time Raveler, one of the strongest planeswalkers in the game, and Jace the Mind Sculptor even.
You also get 5 mana Teferi in the late games.
Yep.
That will
that
end
one
the
will
game.
Finish it off. A lot of the straight Azorius variants now are playing Kahira as a companion because the only creatures you're playing in your main are 4 copies of Solitude.
Yep. And,
Swords to Plowshares on a body.
Yeah, I hear Swords to Plowshares really good, huh?
I like me a Swords to Plowshares, and I like it even better with a 3/2 lifelink body. Why does it have lifelink?
I don't know. Also, one of the best things is if you cast it outright, you still have Teferi Time Raveler to just put it back and do it all over
Yeah,
again.
you can just bounce it to your own hand. Jace bounces it to your hand too.
There's a lot of good ways, especially targeted removal like that can just get rid of something permanently. All you give them is some life. In a control deck, who cares?
Yeah, you gotta love it. So that's our control discussion. Let's move on to mid-range. Mid-range is kind of the bread and butter of Modern in a lot of ways. What a lot of people think of when they think of Modern, especially old, original Modern, is the mid-range decks. Hey, Arven, what's probably the most classic deck in Modern?
So, very classic. Jund. Just Jund 'em. You just Jund 'em.
You just Jund 'em.
So, if you don't know, if you have been living under a rock, Jund was also called Rock because it had different variations. But you get cards like Tarmogoyf. Tarmogoyf was originally a print mistake and now is one of the staples of Jund. And in recent years, you get Renin 6. Renin 6 is Jund, does everything that Jund wants. It gets you lands, it deals damage, and if you get to ult it, how do you feel about Lightning Bolt that never goes away?
Every single turn.
Yep, and you also, because it just comes right in, as a companion, you get Luris. Can you guess what everything that's a permanent in your deck costs?
2 or less.
Yep, and Luris puts them all back into play.
We still get to play with Monkey. We still get to play with Darcy.
And and you get to play with the premier removal of Modern. You get Lightning Bolt, you get Unholy Heat, and you get all of the hand hate. You get Thoughtseize, you get Inquisition.
Inquisition of Kozilek, yeah.
Yep, those are all very powerful Magic cards. Like, some of the variations of Jund have, like, taken different effects where, you don't play Luris, you play the Mayhem Devil with, like, Gris combo. You just kind of sacrifice everything. That's the one thing with Jund, is you deal a lot of damage by sacrificing a lot of stuff.
Yep.
But it's give and take.
Jund is definitely one of those decks where you just gain advantage in the game by playing the game and by your opponent playing the game. Worth mentioning, too, this is an Urza Saga deck.
It is.
You get to play a few nice artifacts. Some versions will play Nile Spellbomb, Pyrite Spellbomb, definitely playing Mishra's Baubles. Shadow Spear is a gross card.
Piffing Needle for those like pesky Tron players.
You get to bring some great cards in out of the sideboard. Soul Guide Lantern.
Soul Guide Lantern's a very good one.
Yeah.
You get a lot of different things against a lot of different... Jund is... If you're thinking of a fair deck, this is as fair as it gets. You play just on curve, you're playing creatures, you're playing some... It's a very fair deck. Unlike some of the other decks in the format.
Yeah, which we'll get to when we get to combo.
Oh yeah, but for that being said, what do you got for mid-range? What do you usually like to play?
Well, if you like mid-range, how do you feel about mid-range where your creatures share a creature type?
Interesting, go on.
Okay, I'm talking about elementals.
Ah, I see. Okay.
So, elementals, since Magic 2020, Core Set 20, have been getting a lot of love. A lot of love. But right now, they're probably in the best place they have been ever in Modern. You get some very powerful card advantage engines in Omnath, Locus of Creation, and Risen Reef. Whenever an elemental comes in, you look at your top card. If it's a land, okay, it just goes into play. If it's not, okay, just draw it.
What happens when there's 2 of those in play?
Oh, well, they trigger off each other, and then the triggers happen twice.
Oh, I see.
Gigantic advantage engine. Playing this deck lets you play with Cavern of Souls because all your creatures
are elementals.
Yep.
And all those pesky control decks goes, I have a counter spell. That's nice.
Does nothing. Also, it lets you fix your colors because a lot of these are 4-color decks, and Cavern of Souls being like, okay, you just get to pay any of the colors that you're missing for that Omnath.
And you also get Renin 6 because you play a lot of fetch lands, and that's one of the best ways to fix your colors. Just put that fetch land back in your hand and grab the next thing.
Yep. Some versions will play Teferi, 3-mana Teferi. Your removal mostly consists of Fury and Solitude. And you get to play with Ephemerate. Just flickering your creatures, getting additional triggers off of Risen Reef, getting additional ETB triggers for the Evoke Elementals.
How do you feel about Solitude? How do you feel about a Solitude twice?
Or 3 times, because Ephemerate rebounds.
Yup. Feels pretty good, huh?
Yep, it's pretty darn okay. You get to play with Prismatic Ending because you're in 4 colors, so you're going to hit most of Modern with 4 colors, and you just get some gross stuff.
And you also get Omnath that does all of this. Literally does everything you want. Damage, life, mana, cards, does everything that you want it to do.
Playing with all those fetch lands means you're going to have a lot of landfall triggers, and you're just going to draw extra cards and gain a bunch of life, get some free mana. Pretty gross. Looking over the list the last time that it did, I always forget that Mold Drifter is an elemental.
How do you feel about drawing 4 cards for technically 3 mana?
Pretty good, not bad.
It's pretty good. I like evoking Mold Drifter.
I forget that Voice of Resurgence is an elemental.
It is. It is.
Oh man, you just get some nasty stuff out of this deck. It's a very synergistic mid-range deck that just wants to get all these creatures into play. Again, Kahira cares about elementals, so you're playing that as a companion. Bring it out as an anthem for your creatures and just go to town.
And since you're in the right colors, you also get Eldamri's Call. So whatever situation calls for, you just search for the best answer in your deck.
Your deck has an answer.
Your deck is nothing but answers.
Especially post-board. You get to bring in some extra elementals and just... It's so gross.
But with that being said, the next topic is combo. And personally, I like this deck. I hate playing against it. But it is Living End.
Living End.
So Living End has existed in Modern in some shape, way, or another. And if you don't know, Living End is a suspend card with mana value of 0. So you play a bunch of cyclers that usually cost 7, 8, 5, 6, a bunch of mana that you will never actually hard cast.
They always cost more than 2.
Oh yeah. And you just put them in the graveyard. You get a bunch of just a bunch of free cyclers in Street Wraith. So you just pay 2
That's
life.
A huge one. Architects of Will, Cycles for 1.
Cycles for 1. Yeah, that's a very good one. So, and also what you're trying to do is resolve a Violent Outburst, usually on your opponent's turn, or the new card that we got.
Why did they put Shardless Agent in Modern?
See, they wanted a Living End a little bit of a push. So essentially, you cast one of these cards that has Cascade. And the only thing that costs 3 or less in your entire deck is Living End. So you just keep going until you find Living End, and you put all of the creatures that you just put into your graveyard the last 2 turns or 3 turns, whenever it is, all back into play.
And any creatures your opponent had in play goes right to the graveyard. Yep.
Even if they had like 1 or 2 creatures in their graveyard, you don't care. Your stuff is just so much bigger. You get for what you've paid. Usually this happens on turn 3, and you have like 5 creatures in play. It could be randomly out of nowhere, like 15, 20 power. And if you're casting Violent Outburst, that's on your opponent's end step.
Yep.
Ooh,
they get to attack on your next turn.
And the best part is, if you do that, you also still have Force of Negation for free to protect it.
On your own turn, yeah. Living End is a great example of what we call an all-in combo deck, where the whole deck is just built around... Like, you do have Force of Negation, but the whole deck, every card, is just built around, I'm going to resolve this Living End, I'm going to get a bunch of creatures into play. Oh, yes, and you get to play with Grief.
Yeah.
Good grief.
So I enjoy going, I'm going to play Grief for free. I'm going to cast some sort of Cascade. I'm going to play Grief again. Thoughtseize anyone?
Yeah.
Yikes.
Yep.
What about
Get
you,
your
JC?
opponent's answers out of their hand.
Oh, yeah. What do you got for combo?
You know, a combo deck I have constantly lost to, and so I finally decided to build it for myself, and I've loved it, loved playing this deck, is Amulet Titan.
Ah, I remember that.
So there's 3 primary cards that we need to talk about here. One's a group of cards, but we'll get to that. Amulet of Vigor, 1 mana artifact that says whenever a permanent enters tapped under your control, untap it. Bounce lands, such as, we'll start with Simic Growth Chamber. It taps for a blue and a green, and it enters tapped, but when it enters, you have to return a land you control to its owner's hand. However, it entering tapped means it untaps right away. You get to float a couple of mana, and you can return it or one of your other lands to your hand. Primeval Titan.
What does that card do, JC?
Well, Primeval Titan, known better as Prime Time, is 4 green for a 6/6 with Trample. And when it enters the battlefield or attacks, search your library for up to 2 land cards, not basic lands, 2 land cards. Put them on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. The primary combo with this deck is that you will get Sunholm, and I believe it's called
anything that
help
honestly,
me out here.
Yeah, of course. So
Slayer's Stronghold, yeah.
Something that gives him double strike or makes him bigger.
Yep.
And he just finds these lands, and if you have an Amulet of Vigor into play, it just untaps him, and then you just keep going from there. You just kind of if you have a 6/6 Titan that you just gave +3/+3 to and gave double strike, that's 18 damage out of nowhere. And in Modern, you're fetching and shocking. That's lethal damage coming at you.
Yep.
That is a lot of damage.
The normal route for this deck is Slayer's Stronghold plus Boros Garrison when the Titan comes into play. They untap because of your amulet. You activate Slayer's Stronghold to give the Titan +2/+0 Vigilance and Haste. So you attack for 8, trigger the Titan again. You go get Vesuva to copy your Boros Garrison, and Sunholm. Yeah, which for 2, a red and a white gives a target creature double strike till end of turn. So you're attacking for 16. Unless your opponent's on something like Tron that doesn't fetch with fetch lands, no, they're almost certainly dead.
Oh, yeah.
And your backup combo for this is Dryad of the Elysian Grove plus Valakut, which turns all your lands into mountains, and Valakut says, hey, do you have 6 or more mountains? Great.
Cool.
Then Lightning Bolt, and Lightning Bolt, and Lightning Bolt.
It is of note is you get also Urza Saga, which finds your Amulet of Vigor, which just keeps the chain rolling and rolling.
Double Amulet means you can float way more mana. Double activate the Slayer's Stronghold.
The double Amulet works the way you want it to work. They enter, they untap, and then you can keep going again.
Yep, it's pretty great. This deck is so powerful and so much fun to play. It's intricate, it's unique and creative, and I love it. I just love it.
I do too. I really enjoy this kind of deck.
All right, so let's talk about our last category, hybrid combo. Hybrid combo is kind of a weird one where, again, you have a combo in your deck, but you're also sort of playing an aggressive plan or a mid-range plan or a control plan, depending on what the deck is. These are where a lot of decks fit because they want to play sort of an unfair finish, but a fair game if they have to.
Absolutely. So one of the decks being Mill. Mill, they try to combo you, unless you're playing something like 80 cards or so. It just depends on what you're trying to do, but it's exactly what it sounds like. Mill, if you are not familiar, which is now a keyword, is put the top X cards of your library into your graveyard. And most of these decks are going to be Lurrus decks, because the only thing that they play that are creatures are 2 copies of 2 different crabs that do the same thing.
Yeah, Hedron Crab and Ruin Crab, if you're not familiar, are single blue for crabs that say when a land enters under your control, your opponent mills 3.
Yep. And since you are a mill deck and you don't care about your life total that often, you just play in nothing but fetch lands.
Yeah.
So they trigger twice.
Lots and lots of fetch lands,
Oh, absolutely. And your entire deck is just hand disruption and mill you for 1,000,000 cards, because that's literally the entire point of the deck. I'm going to be honest, I lose to this deck all the time, but I still like it a lot.
Oh, yeah. You get to play Archive Trap, which you can play for free if your opponent searched their library. Glimpse the Unthinkable. Mill your opponent for 10 for 2 mana.
So,
but there's one card that really made this deck come to life. Yeah, it's that one. It's called Tasha's Hideous Laughter. Arven, would you read this card for us?
So if you don't know, it says each opponent exiles from the top of their library until that player exiles cards with mana value 20 or more. In Modern, 20 or more. Most decks average CMC is what, 3? 2.5?
Yeah, we've been talking a lot about Lurrus decks where a lot of the cards cost 2 or less because you can't play permanents that cost 3 or more. So against a Lurrus deck, this is bad news bears.
The only 2 decks that are like kind of out of the water are Tron and what's it called? The Taxes deck.
Oh, yeah, Death and Taxes, because they play
so many cards.
80 cards because they're a Yorion deck.
But like out of the entire meta, you're quote unquote 2 bad matchup, or you only have 2 bad matchups? That's not bad at all.
No, it's pretty darn okay. And you get to play Fatal Push and Drown in the Lock to counter or kill your opponent's threats, and you get to play Surgical Extraction to remove things from their graveyard, get all the copies out, and now you don't have to worry about that thing.
Especially if they're playing like Titans to shuffle everything back. Sure, they'll get the 1 over shuffle, but you get to get rid of that. You can mill them pretty quickly. I do want to very quickly mention Drown in the Lock in that deck. Does everything. Kills, counters, whatever you needed to do, it will do it.
Yeah, if you're not familiar with this card, blue and a black for an instant, destroy target creature with mana value less than or equal to the number of cards in its controller's graveyard when you've milled them.
Yup.
Or counter target spell with mana value less than or equal to the number of cards in its controller's graveyard when you've milled them.
So no matter what they play, even if they're on Tron, a lot of times you're like, oh, I've milled you for 15. I can counter everything that you've played.
Yep. It's just counterspell. At a time when we didn't have counterspell. Now we have both, but honestly, this being either destroy or kill
is very, very powerful. What about you? What's on your side of the spectrum?
Well, to close us out for our main topic, I'm going to talk about probably Arven and I's favorite hybrid combo deck, Tron.
I love Tron.
I know there's a lot of people who don't, but I love it too.
You and I play two different variations of it. What do you? What's the version you're talking about?
So we're going to talk about mono green Tron, sort of the classic Boomer Tron, as they're calling it now. So this is a deck that operates on the 3 Tron lands: Urza's Mine, Urza's Power Plant, and Urza's Tower, which individually only tap for 1 colorless, but if you have one of each out, the towers all tap for 3 colorless, and the mines and the power plants tap for 2. 7 mana on turn 3.
That's the running joke with Tron, is how quickly can I count to 7?
Yep, 1 + 1 + 1 is 7. And with 7 colorless mana, we get to cast Karn Liberated. With 1 more land, we can cast Ugin the Spirit Dragon. Get up high enough, we can cast Titans like Emrakul or Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger.
And if turn 4, that second land is a tower, or that 4th land, I should say, is a tower, the second copy, you get an Ulamog on turn 4.
Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger on turn 4 is pretty nasty, especially if you're exiling 2 lands and your opponent goes, oh, I got double strip mined. Oh, I'm not playing Magic.
Especially if turn 3 you went Karn, you're definitely not playing Magic that game.
We get to play Worm Coil Engine, giant threat that, again, Lightning Bolt doesn't kill it.
No, and Walking Ballista.
Yeah.
Walking Ballista's nasty.
Probably the best thing Tron has gotten in a long time is Walking Ballista.
Tron, so Wizards is very weird. They have printed a lot of hate for Tron. Even when you read the card, you're like, okay, this is pretty good. It's geared towards Tron. The one I can think of is Alpine Moon.
Yep.
Alpine Moon is just geared towards Tron.
Shut down a particular land, yeah.
Yep.
Tron's power comes in its consistency, which comes from playing things like Ancient Stirring, Sylvan Scrying, Expedition Map to find your other Tron lands, get the combo online. Playing Chromatic Star and Chromatic Sphere to filter into green mana and draw extra cards so you can play your green spells. This deck is consistent, it's fun, it's very powerful, it's very good against fair decks. It preys on fair decks.
That's what I love about Tron. It's the best deck in Modern if you want a mulligan, because you only need 3 lands in your hand. Literally just 3 lands. Mine, Power Plant, Tower. Everything else is a live draw.
The only thing that comes close, I think, in mulligans is Dredge.
Yeah.
And another powerful deck that plays with your graveyard, but Dredge usually takes a little bit more time to go off. Can go off very consistently, but them going off is getting a bunch of little creatures into play, and Tron goes, no, one big idiot.
Yeah.
One big thing and dumb get you.
Pretty much it's going to end the game, because they usually, the hate makers they have, they're real hate makers. Karn Liberated, that's not a joke.
No.
Vindicate every turn is no joke.
No, yep. The -3 is exile target permanent.
It's even better.
Gone.
Yeah, it's just gone forever.
So these are some of the best decks in Modern right now, but there's a whole bunch more you can play. If you like aggro, you could play Infect. There's Domain Zoo. If you like combo, we talked about Dredge. There's a whole bunch of other sweet decks.
It's not really a combo style deck, but I think it is. You also have the Crashing Footfalls deck.
Yeah, that one's real strong. Cascading into Crashing Footfalls, just getting some 4/4s.
Oh, absolutely. And the more mid-rangey style of decks, it has different names, but it's like the Yawgmoth, Drolf's Messenger combo deck. You just randomly win out of the game. You just kill your opponent out of nowhere.
Apparently, there's a sweet Blink deck going around now where you get to play Yorion and Ephemerate and just flicker a bunch of cool strong ETB creatures.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of... That's what I love about Modern, is it's very, very diverse. And also, the aggro decks, those weren't all of them. There's also, like, Izzet Blitz, where you play all of the good Izzet cards, except just a little...
With prowess creatures,
with prowess creatures. It's very powerful. Like, Modern, like kind of what we mentioned, it's in a very healthy place.
Yeah.
And one of the sort of control decks is Death and Taxes. You're not. It doesn't seem like
It's like a
playing
disruptive
control deck.
aggro deck.
Yeah, it's very. It's you can do control, but you also can just do aggro out of nowhere. I don't know.
Death Shadow exists in this format.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So the point is, whatever you like to do in Magic, you can find that in Modern in some form or fashion, and you don't have to break the bank to do it. There's also some really sweet budget decks that you can build for like $50 that just are absolutely gonna win you games. They might not win you the tournament, but they'll win you games, and your opponents will not see it coming.
No, absolutely not. There is quite a few different budget decks where so a resource that I like to use is MTG Goldfish. They show you a lot of different budget options that you might like, and like you said, it will not break the bank, and you will have good games to play against people.
Yep. And real answers to the threats that the more expensive like meta decks play. You're going to be able to compete with those decks. This is why we enjoy Modern. Again, it's diverse. You have a lot of options. You get to play with powerful cards, and you get to play with them on your budget, on your time. It's awesome.
And the best part is, you don't have to, if you're playing any of like the other formats, in Commander, you have to count down to 40. This format's just 20.
Yep, and you have one opponent, so you can just direct all your attention, all your aggression right there, and just get them.
Absolutely.
All right, well, we're going to move into our closing segment, which we're calling Scoop Speed. So we're going to use this segment to just talk about bad beat stories, cringe stories, whatever. It doesn't have to be Magic, although today's is. Just fun stuff to try and get a reaction out of the other host.
Interesting. So in this one, it's telling me CJC. So what is the story that you have for us, JC?
So I'm going to tell the story of how I met Arven.
Oh, I like this one.
See, I don't, because Arven got me good.
Oh, yeah.
So we're playing Standard. This would have been back in 2018 when Dominaria was in Standard. I'm playing Blue-White Control, and this kid I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
Looked like a kid anyway. Walks into the store, sits down across from me in round 3 or 4. We're both undefeated. I'm loving it. I'm like, okay, I can take this person on. I don't know who they are, but I can take them. I got this sweet blue-white control deck. I'm going to get them.
In case you guys don't know, if I don't know any sort of metagame or anything, I come in with mono red and aggressive at that. But yeah, continue, please.
So Arven shows up with goblins. There were quite a few good goblins at the time. It starts with a turn 1 Skirk Prospector, which lets you sack goblins for mana, and kills me with Banefire, which can't be countered if X is 5 or more, so he just fireballed my face. We go to game 2. I resolve a Shalai and a Lyra. I'm gaining way too much life. Arven scoops.
Yeah.
We go to game 3.
This is the good one.
Arven forgot to side out a card that shouldn't do anything in this matchup because I don't play small creatures. It's called Goblin Crater Maker. If you're not familiar with this card, that's okay. It doesn't see a ton of play, but it is a sideboard card in some Goblin decks. It's 1 and a red for a 2/1, and then pay a 1 and sack it to either destroy target colorless non-land permanent, or deal 2 damage to target creature or planeswalker, I believe. Well, that doesn't do anything to creatures that have 4 and 5 toughness. So Arven's like, oh, I forgot to side this card out. Well, I guess I'll play it. It's a threat, whatever. I'm like, okay. And I'm laughing to myself. I'm like, I sideboarded wrong. So
how did that make you feel?
Well, I kept the hand on the strength of having Shalai, which gives me hexproof and has 4 toughness. And Arven goes, oh, pay 1, sack my Goblin Crater Maker, deal 2 to your Shalai. Okay. Shock Shalai. Oh. Yeah, all right.
Proceed to play Banefire for X equals a lot.
I drew nothing but lands for the rest of the game, and I got Banefired out of the game as well as hit with a bunch of goblins.
What's your favorite color, JC, in Magic?
It's definitely not red.
Ah, I see.
So yeah, I got burned to the ground by a bunch of goblins, and I was just like, how did I lose? How did I lose that? But we've gone on to be very good friends thereafter.
Oh yeah.
Although Arven doesn't forget an opportunity to remind me of Goblin Crater Maker.
Nope, I do not. And I didn't think we were going to be friends, but it turns out we became very good friends.
Yep. I'm still mad about Crater Maker, though. Well, that brings us to the end of our episode. Thank you so much for sticking with us. Don't forget to check out our YouTube channel, youtube.com/themanavault, and, of course, to check out our Patreon, patreon.com/themanavaultyt. Thank you so much for joining us. I have been JC. This has been Arven.
Thank you so much. We'll see you guys here next week.
Bye-bye now.